Hello, Leftofawesome. I'm pleased to wish you an intellectually liberated Banned Books Week. Anyway, as I mentioned, my friends, it is Banned Books Week. And, well, currently what I am reading for Banned Books Week is Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. This classic is ranked number 15, I believe, by the American Library Association on their list of most frequently banned and challenged classics. Previously, I was reading, and just finished, The Enchantress of Florence by Salman Rushdie. This book is brilliant. Absolutely bloody brilliant. I can't really bother to explain the plot because it's rather complicated, but I highly suggest you all read it. It's got some excellent philosophical elements, it's hilarious, it's completely unlike most stuff I've read before. And it's also of relevance to the issue of Banned Books Week because it's written by Salman Rushdie, who, as I'm sure most of you, or at least many of you know, was under a death threat by the Ayatollah Iran for quite some time. I believe it was Iran, because of his book The Satanic Verses, which was deemed blasphemous by certain members of the religion of Islam. And there was much support for this attempt to silence the author among the religious community in the West, which happens to have this strange respect for religious aversion to any ideas that may happen to counter their own. This aversion to religious dissent, this aversion to so-called blasphemy, which George Bernard Shaw, I believe it was, correctly identified as the way all great ideas start, has been recently codified in UN law under their defamation of religion resolutions, which are primarily being led by Islamic theocracies and, to a certain extent, the Vatican. These resolutions attempt to squelch free speech and say that countries are justified in restricting speech that amounts to an attempt to incite any sort of hatred or distaste against religion. Well, anything that could offend religion. Ireland is following suit on this, creating a defamation of religion bill, which has, or really they simply call it a blasphemy law in many circles, which would prohibit the expression of any ideas which are considered offensive to any religious sensibilities. Say goodbye to Christopher Hitchens, say goodbye to Richard Dawkins, say goodbye to George Orwell, say goodbye to Salman Rushdie, say goodbye to just about everything you love. Say goodbye to the ideas of the Enlightenment, say goodbye to the ideas of each individual religion, because guess what? In any religion, there's going to be something that's offensive to another religion. I'm sorry, that's just the way the world works. Back to the topic of Banned Books Week specifically. You may think, we've gotten above banning books. Surely there's no one trying to stop books from being read by your children in schools, for instance? Not so. Recently, there have been challenges to quite a few books in schools. They've been documented on the website of the National Coalition Against Censorship, to which I have a link in the sidebar. And one of the ones that I recognize is there's been some new challenges to Laurie Halse Anderson's novel Speak, which is in certain high school curriculums, because, well, it involves things like rape and alcohol and drugs and various other things that are deemed too controversial. They're inappropriate for the children. Think of the children. If they were exposed to ideas, why, it could scar them. It could scar their weak and fragile little minds and prevent them from being suitably indoctrinated into our ideology. The horror. And that's not the only instance of censorship, because, well, there are many, many instances of attempts to censor books, but face it, free speech is not just about the written word. It's not just about ideas expressed in that way, and it's not even just about individual expression. It's also about the expression that happens to be made in the political arena in the form of broadcast media. And that brings me to a current Supreme Court case going on, which is Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission. In that case, it appears that what's being challenged is the notion that the FEC can ban electioneering communications. That is, that they can restrict political content that is used in broadcast media if it in some way mentions a candidate and is financed by a group such as a corporation or a union. Now, normally, it's the centre-left that tries to be pro-union, yet they're the ones who have pushed most vigorously in favour of campaign finance laws, so I find it interesting that they attempt to censor the political speech of unions. Further, this is not simply applying to things that we conventionally associate with unions and corporations. What many people forget is that political advocacy groups are largely non-profit corporations, including, well, one of my favourite organisations, the American Civil Liberties Union. Nadine Strawson, I believe that's her name, former director of the American Civil Liberties Union, had an excellent discussion with the Cato podcast, an interview which I have linked in the sidebar, obviously, in which she discussed the case and other implications of free speech. And she pointed out, correctly in my view, that this is very dangerous to free speech if free speech loses this Supreme Court case. Because, well, what she said is that the ACLU was unable to put out an ad calling for repeal of the Patriot Act and various other things pertaining to torture during an election season because they were planning on mentioning a particular candidate and requesting that that candidate take certain actions. And when you do that, that's an electioneering communication. Oh dear. Well, there goes that idea. Further, one of the major points of rhetoric that's been used by the more libertarian side in this case is that there's nothing constitutionally to prevent it from being spread from broadcast media to literature, provided that literature is published in some way by a corporation. Well, most literature is distributed by publishing companies. So suppose Vincent Bugliosi were to try to publish this book in the form of, say, a documentary instead of a book, and do so at a point when George W. Bush was up for election. Well, then it would suddenly be an electioneering communication. Why is it that in book form, when Bugliosi makes a reasoned case that the thankfully now former President of the United States, George W. Bush, was complicit in what amounted to murder by lying to get us into the war in Iraq, that in this case, he should be prosecuted? And why is this appropriate for him to say in the form of the printed word, but not on broadcast media during an election season? The idea that this is an attempt to protect us from undue corporate influence is simply intellectually disingenuous. I mean, if we really cared about corporate influence, what we'd have would be things like, transparency. Obama wouldn't have been ignoring court orders regarding his FOIA requests on his meetings with healthcare executives, for instance. The Fed wouldn't be attempting to avoid releasing information regarding where their money's going in terms of the banking system. We wouldn't be trying to avoid oversight on distribution of the TARP money. There wouldn't be tons and tons of superfluous agricultural subsidies, etc., etc. We wouldn't have no-bid contracts with military contractors. I could go on. Statism is allied with corporatism. It's not as though an attempt to squelch free speech is going to help in this regard. There are plenty more free speech issues where that came from, I'm sure. There's books that are being challenged. There's people whose speech is being squelched because they're under suspicion of crimes. There's ideological exclusion still going on in terms of immigration policy and coming into this country to spread one's ideas. All of these are infringements upon the fundamental right that is codified in the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. and which would be a right and an essential component of any functionally democratic society, regardless of whether it was codified in any law. So, in this Banned Books Week, I suggest that you read whatever literature you want, that you attempt to free your mind, that you attempt to understand new and great ideas, and that you challenge any attempts at censorship and the squelching of your intellectual sovereignty wherever they come from.